Hello, BookTube. I thought I'd do another quick comic book update. Uh, since I read them, and it's of interest to me and some of you. And of course, in comics right now, the big news was a recent announcement by Marvel Comics about not their next huge company-wide mega event, but the one after that, something called Marvel Legacy. Will kick off, I think, in the fall. The head of Marvel Comics made a bland, give nothing away statement in which he said that Marvel would be using this as an opportunity to return to their storytelling roots and to the legacies that have made Marvel beloved by so many legions of fans. Uh, and some of the teased artwork hints at what that might be. And when I first heard it, I thought, well, if Marvel wants to return to its storied roots, it's got its work cut out for it. Because right now, thanks to an absolutely foaming at the mouth, rabid, knee jerk pandering to what it considers diversity, virtually no iconic Marvel character is iconic anymore. Thor is a woman, Jane Foster, a human named Jane Foster, who didn't gain. This is probably the worst case. She didn't gain control of Thor's hammer or a variant of Thor's power. She became Thor, like his own. It's his name, and but it apparently is transferable. And the run has been by and large awful. And Iron Man is no longer Tony Stark. He's the name Iron Man is now a young black woman, and the Hulk is no longer Bruce Banner. Instead, he's a young Asian boy. And in the X Men, the X Men is also a disaster because Jean Grey, Scott Summers, and Professor X are all dead, and the flagship team now is the teenage original X-Men who have been moved forward in time and aren't going back. They're just going to stay 30 years forward in the future, even though that's just crazy. That all you have to do is think about that for a minute to realize it makes more problems than it solves by a factor of 1,000. And we can go on, right? We can go on and on. Captain America is not only not Captain America, that is now Sam Wilson, the Falcon, who is Captain America, but Steve Rogers, Captain America, turns out to be an agent of Hydra, who's been working for the bad guys this whole time, and it's a whole plot line that's going to have to be resolved. And probably worst of all, probably the one that gets to me the most, Marvel is currently not publishing the Fantastic Four, the super team that started it all. Fantastic Four #1 gave birth to the modern era of Marvel Comics, and it's been Marvel's flagship title ever since. And they don't publish it anymore. And why? Because of turf wars in Hollywood over movie product rights that have nothing to do with the comics. And so on and so on and so on and so on. Almost every one of these decisions has been bad. Really, really bad. Not just pandering, but thin. For every one really good one of these changes, like for instance, there's a young Muslim, Ms. Marvel, that's done really well, done with a lot of energy, so you can't object. And the title was defunct. The superhero title, no one was currently using it. And also, in my opinion, the best example, Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man, different costume, biracial, bisexual. It's young, not sure of himself, new ground. Uh, Still would have wished that Miles Morales was a different super character instead of taking on the mantle of Spider-Man, especially when Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, is still around. Um, but if Legacy is Marvel's decision to back up on some of these rotten decisions, maybe to have the X-Men back again, maybe to have Thor back again, maybe to have Captain America back again, Spider-Man back again, the Fantastic Four back again, Iron Man back again, the Hulk back again. Maybe if Legacy is Marvel's decision to try and do that, then it'll probably be interesting to watch. But I think it'll be a disaster because Marvel doesn't seem to be doing anything right, in my opinion, these days. They're just tripping over themselves left, right, and center in the comics. And of course, in the cinematic universe, they can almost do no wrong, with the very notable exception, in Steve's opinion, of Guardians of the Galaxy, which is going to make $1 billion. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is going to make $1 billion in profit over the cost of its special effects and budget and cast. $1 billion in profit. Anyway, but mostly Marvel it does a really good job in the cinematic version, and I think that the DC does much better in the actual comics department, which is why this time around in this little comics moment, I want to talk about two DC characters, and not just any two DC characters, but two out of the three archetypal tentpole DC comics. No Wonder Woman this time around, but Batman and Superman. And Superman, we start off with the new Action Comics, which is, if you can get past the wretched Gary Frank cover, I swear I don't know how this guy gets work. What's happening on that cover? I don't really know. I mean, I see Superman. I see someone. We don't see her face. Maybe she's not important. Oh, well, maybe it's Lois Lane. I guess you could maybe infer that. He seems to be waving. Is he waving? No. If you study it really hard, you'll see that he's actually holding something up. But Gary Frank apparently doesn't know that he's drawing this for a comic book cover, and that there's going to be a masthead up on top that's going to block something that's positioned right there. It's just I made the mistake of getting the Gary Frank cover instead of the alternate cover, which was by one of the Kubert brothers and was good. But this issue continues what was started in the previous issue, where let me backtrack a little. 6 years ago, DC Comics did its own company-wide massive mega event called the New 52, in which it re-envisioned all of its characters, wiped the slate clean on their history, and gave them crappy new costumes and crappy new attitudes and new histories that were stripped of any kind of humanity. And it was an absolute pig's breakfast from the beginning. I was just aghast, but I was willing to try and give it the benefit of the doubt, even though my own favorite DC character, Superman, was hard hit. He was the new Superman, the new 52 Superman. The only Superman was a superpowered jerkwad who would float 4 inches above the ground when he was talking to people. So he'd be talking on the streets of Metropolis with Perry White or a police commissioner, but he'd be floating. They'd have to look up at him just a little. And anyway, that continuity lasted for a long time. I don't know how, but it did. And I watched and bought and read periodically. And then there was a mega event, another mega event, where it turned out that the previous DC continuity, the one with our real heroes, the real versions of them, had been separated from normal reality. And all of our characters had been living in that for the whole time that the DC New 52 had been going on, including Superman and Lois Lane. And in that alternate reality, they had had a son. They'd had a baby boy. And when that mega event was folded into the New 52 in another mega event, suddenly the resulting comic book reality had two Supermen. It had the obnoxious, popped collar, preppy New 52 Superman, and it had the real Superman, who's in love with Lois Lane and is the father of a little boy, and who was in hiding because he thought the world doesn't need two Supermen. And then, in yet another mega event, the New 52 Superman died, and the real Superman joined the New 52 universe, even though he didn't know any of these people. He didn't know. It wasn't his Batman. It wasn't his Justice League. It wasn't his Wonder Woman. All those relationships were over. They were mourning their friend, and all of a sudden there's this new guy who's a little older and a little wider in the waist, and they don't know him at all, but he's Superman. He is the exact same power set and background and whatnot. And that was a mess too. So I guess I'm not really singing DC's praises over Marvel here. I just don't know why comic book companies don't just leave these things alone. Just tell really good stories instead of constantly rebooting and revamping things. But anyway, recently, there was this weird, confusing issue where the New 52 Superman's reality and the old Superman's reality, their entire backgrounds, were merged to make one Superman. So all of a sudden, the real Superman, the one that we remember, who's in love with Lois Lane, who has a kid, is the only Superman that had ever been. His past is merged with the New 52 Superman. And this issue takes us through a little more of that shared history. So we see highlights from, it's basically, the first half of it is basically a highlight reel from showing us this Superman's reality, the new reality for Superman, that is the only reality that everyone remembers, where there was no pocket universe. Batman and Wonder Woman were present at the birth of his son. Everyone remembers all the adventures he had in his previous existence, and there was never any two Supermen. There was only this one guy who was there all along. A moment's thought will show that doesn't make any sense at all. There's no way that you can reconcile that, but DC Comics says that it has, and this issue gives us the rest of that history, brings that new melded one version history up to the present day, all as a prelude to upending it all over again, because there's a mysterious cloaked figure. We mentioned it last time. It's almost certainly going to end up being Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen, who's been watching all of this, causing all of this, affecting all of this, and wants maybe to do more changing of all of this. So who knows where it's going to end up. DC Comics has been doing this for 5 years now. Every year they give themselves some sort of reality warping, big mega event, get out of jail free card, where if they wanted to, they could just reset everything to the way all the fans liked it. Just take everything back to that and forget everything that's happened from there. None of this merging one reality with another. Just pretend the New 52 never happened and all the subsequent events never happened. Fix it so that we have the real Justice League. We have the Justice Society that fought during World War II. We have a Legion again. We have all of the relationships back in place. They'll slowly get there, because comic book fans really do like homeostasis. So they will eventually get there. But in terms of reading this issue, that first half of it, second half sets up an actual plot line for the next story arc for Superman. But the first half of it, where I'm looking at this new reality, Steve was not convinced. Like, for instance, there's a famous Superman storyline where he dies. It's still the most popular, best-selling comic book graphic novel of them all. The Death of Superman, where this big behemoth comes to Gotham City and they punch each other to death. And while Superman is dead, of course he's not completely dead, he's in some sort of Kryptonian coma, but while he's dead, 4 characters arrive in Metropolis claiming to be him and wanting to take his place. There's Steel, an engineer and a technologist who makes himself a super advanced suit of armor, a superpowered suit of armor. There's the Eradicator, who's a sentient, man-shaped artifact from ancient Krypton. There's Cyborg Superman, who's claiming to be Superman only with mechanical replacements for the parts that Doomsday destroyed, that the monster destroyed in their final battle. And also Superboy, a teenager who ends up being a clone, an imprecise clone of Superman. And that also that storyline where those 4 Supermen eventually reveal their true colors and eventually face the returned, revived, real Superman is also a classic of the pre-New 52 Superman continuity. And when we're going through all this, we get the fight with Doomsday, and we get Superman dying. But when we get to the part where we're told that replacements showed up in Gotham City, there are only 3. There's the Eradicator, Steel, and the Cyborg Superman. No Superboy. And why is that? Well, because little Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, is now Superboy. But that kind of... anyway, let's move on to the next one. My main point about this current issue of Action Comics is that this is a mess, and DC is clearly in the process of sorting it out. So who knows where the chips will fall? And the same thing is true, but in a better way, for an event crossover that DC did with Dynamite Comics, where they have a team up with Batman and the Shadow, which harked me back right away. I know this is the new 52 Batman. This is the new continuity Batman. But longtime comic book fans, and I am one, will remember that Batman, I think it was 263 and 269, back in the 70s. Batman back in the 70s met the Shadow, who was a pulp era comic book character and pulp novel character that I just loved. I just loved him. Him and Doc Savage. I couldn't get enough of either one of their adventures. And the Shadow was also an immensely popular radio drama character, and he had the ability to meld into the darkness. He had the ability to cloud men's minds, and he carried pistols. Carried two pistols, and had a piercing, horrible laugh that made the guilty tremble. A creature of the night, basically a kind of archetypal Batman. And in those earlier Batman, those much earlier Batman comics, when he meets the Shadow, he confesses, "You were my biggest influence. I patterned my career on you." And this comic is Batman meeting the Shadow for the first time. So there's none of that. Those two earlier issues are retconned right out of existence. But one thing I noticed in this issue is very good. It's very, very good. It's Scott Snyder, and he's writing these two meeting, and of course they're not friends. At first, they're not friends. They're operating on drastically different agendas, and the Shadow seems to have gone insane. But one of the callbacks in here, when I first got it, the issue, I was kind of sort of hoping, the nostalgic part of me was kind of sort of hoping that those earlier Batman issues would be referenced, because I love them so much. I've read mine to powder, and they've never been collected, so you have to. I have to hold them very delicately if I want to reread them. But they aren't recalled. They aren't called back. They're not part of this new continuity. But one thing that was called back in this issue repeatedly was the Shadow 4-issue miniseries that the great Howard Chaykin did back in the 80s. He revived the character, he modernized the character, and laid a whole bunch of groundwork for a new vision of the character that is all present in this issue, which was amazing to me. It's this. This is the graphic novel collection of those. This is a new reprint of it, also by Dynamite. My original graphic novel and my original issues are not fit to be held. They'd fall apart like powder. But in this 4-issue thing, we learn the Shadow's origin, which we hadn't really had a definitive edition of before. And we learn why he doesn't age, even though all of his normal human operatives have aged. And the great opening gimmick of this graphic novel is that we meet them all because someone's killing them. And we think, towards the end of the first issue, they're all these bitter old people sitting around in Margot Lane's mansion, grousing about how he disappeared 30 years ago and no one's seen him. And when that chilling laugh suddenly cuts through the room where they're all talking, we assume that we're going to see an old Shadow, an old Lamont Cranston, because that's what we saw in those Batman issues. He was in his 60s and 70s. He was just supernaturally healthy, but we don't instead. And notice what Chaykin does. He makes sure to give the Shadow a shadow. This is recalled a lot in this issue. His Oriental name, his decision to make his operatives refer to him as master, and also the generational thing where he hasn't been around in a long time, and now all of a sudden he's back. I loved it, absolutely loved it, and it would be foolish of me to buy the next 3 issues of this miniseries, because it's going to be a graphic novel that I will certainly buy. So I'm going to have to make a mental note. Much as I loved it, the fact that I loved it is the reason why I shouldn't buy any of the other issues. I should just wait. And trade waiting is what it's called in the comic book world. But there you have it. That was my comic book experience for this week. This went a little long because these two characters have been with me forever. where we've got a new old Superman, a Superman with a revamped past, and we've got Batman meeting the Shadow, which is just awesome. And I'll stop for now, and I'm afraid I might do this again next week. You never know. I'll see you soon, book 2.